we humans, we have language. Our language is we communicate through words, whereas plants communicate through their chemistry, which I think is probably pretty fundamental in this idea of them being better chemists than chemists. They speak in chemistry, so they are constantly adapting and learning new ways to communicate. So I just wanted to hear a little more about that, and I would love to just get if you could try to put that into some kind of framework, this idea of how plants communicate that way, and how through that communication they've sort of learned how to communicate with us and create environments that are conducive to species like us that could potentially be of benefit to them if we don't ignore them and do the wrong thing.
Right. Well, yeah. If you look at the chemical biodiversity in the plant kingdom, and you've probably seen, I've talked about this. So roughly, the chemical biodiversity that you find is divided into so-called primary metabolites or secondary metabolites. The primary metabolites are just pretty much universal. These are just the molecules of life. But then you have these secondary metabolites, which are obviously not essential for life, because they're not found in everything, but they're found in specific species or plant or families or whatever. And so what purpose do they serve? Well, these are the so-called messenger molecules, and they mediate plants' relationships with everything in their environment, from fungi in the soil and insects. It's a whole big thing with insects. Mammals, humans, anything that might interact with them, and on all levels of organization. And often it's the same compounds, right? Nature's very creative at it costs. I mean, it's not really a big metabolic or energy cost for plants to make these things, because they have photosynthesis, right? So energy to synthesize compounds is not really a limiting factor. Still, if one compound works for one purpose and it will work for another, then nature's ingenious about repurposing these molecules for multiple reasons. I mean, for example, beta-carbolines are a good example. Beta-carbolines are the alkaloids that are found in ayahuasca, and they're the monoamine oxidase inhibitors in ayahuasca that activate or protect the DMT from being broken down. So they have that effect in mammals. They inhibit monoamine oxidase, but they also are photodynamic, so they have antibiotic activities and antiparasitic activities in the presence of light. They're light activated, some of them. They do other things too. I mean, they have, if you put your panel of beta-carbolines through a screen, you'll find antibiotic activity, antiparasitic activity, antifungal activity. They have a whole spectrum of activities. So plants are ingenious about using these messenger molecules in a variety of contexts. So, people don't understand, it's easy to look at a plant and say, well, it's just kind of sitting there, it's not doing much, but it's deceptive, because actually there's a lot going on, even though a plant is just sitting there, but you don't see it. I mean, it's photosynthesizing. That's a whole process. It's making these compounds. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's like being in a multiple chat session, with everything around it. I mean, it's talking to the fungi, it's talking to the insects, it's talking to the animals that might be around, it's talking to other plants. And, this is the chemical, you can think of these secondary compounds as kind of ecosystemic neurotransmitters, in the sense that in the brain, neurotransmitters are those small molecules that mediate signal transduction, right? Signal transduction is a huge thing in biology. And, you know, much as these neurotransmitters, which are derived from plants ultimately, work to, you know, let neurons, hyperconnected neuronal networks talk to each other, they also tie the ecosystem together in very much the same way. It's all about homeostasis, feedback loops, and signal transduction.
So is it a coincidence? Obviously not, that these neurotransmitters that are plant created, plant synthesized, match so closely the ones that naturally occur in our brains? I mean, is there what is the explanation for that? What came first? You know, obviously plants came first, but why is there such similarity? What is that achieving in this ecosystem?
It's just a reflection. It's just a reflection of exactly this. It's a reflection of, you know, sort of evolutionary consequences. You know, the neurotransmitters existed. I mean, they weren't neurotransmitters because there were no nervous systems at the time. But serotonin, for example, is one of the oldest neurotransmitters phylogenetically. And it's one of the oldest neurohormones in our phylogeny, in mammalian phylogeny, but it's much more ancient than that. I mean, the most, you know, there are people that have looked at the phylogeny of the genes that make tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid. I mean, we don't make it, but it's universal in everything. And, you know, the genetic, the so-called tripoperon, the cluster of genes that synthesizes that amino acid, which is the precursor for all the indole alkaloids and some that we love so much, right? And that goes back 3.8 billion years at least. I mean, it was made by those genes are found in the archaea bacteria, which are the most ancient organisms that we know. So when it comes to mammals, we're a relatively recent player on the evolutionary stage. And nature has, you know, the neurotransmitters already had these messenger functions in the ecosystem. And when nervous systems began to evolve, it was just here's a convenient molecule that is very effective in signal transduction processes. So it was just adopted. Ultimately, at some point, we trace our ancestry to, I think they call it the LUCA for short, the likely universal common ancestor. We all evolved from that critter, whatever it was, you know, and it was probably not very interesting, but it gave rise to everything else. And so as you got this proliferation genetically in species and so on, the molecules were carried along. And what was useful was adapted to numerous purposes. So I think that's the answer. It wasn't a coincidence so much as an inevitability. I mean, why should life keep reinventing the wheel in a certain way? If you've got something that works, you fit it together like Lego pieces, you know, and I think that's the reason.
You know, I feel like this concept, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, but this concept of our not inferiority, but you know, the equal playing field that humans and plants are on is kind of a new thing. Even doing like the shamanic work and plant medicine work, you know, I've never fully grasped it until recently. You know, just reading some of your work and listening to some of your talks, is this idea that it's possible that we don't know what we think we know. I mean, obviously, I believe that in many aspects of my life, but I've always thought I had the plant world kind of figured out. I kind of understood how it sort of, you know, the role it played in my life. But the work that you're doing kind of points to this, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it points to this idea that they might be the ones that are actually in charge, you know, and we're the ones, or we're helping, we're doing, not doing their bidding, but that our role is not near. We're not the apex.
No, we're not the apex. We are not running this show, right? I mean, if ayahuasca, and you've heard me say this in talks, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate. I mean, people say, well, what do you learn from ayahuasca? One thing I learn is, one thing it really emphasizes to me always, just reminds me how little we do know. I mean, it's very humbling in that way, to be reminded that we're scientific, we're post-technological, we tend to think we know a great deal. Actually, we know only a very small slice of what's really going on. Science is very good at looking at isolated phenomena, and small pieces of reality, and it's good for detail work. You dissect some process, you can really understand it in depth. The question is, how does it fit into the entire holistic environment that life exists in? And people tend to not, it's not very good at creating this holistic picture, so that is one aspect of it. And I think science tends to get a little arrogant about how much it knows, and there's no place for that, because actually what we don't know will always greatly exceed what we do know. And occasionally you get people we'll write a book about science and say, well, the general gist of it is, well, we pretty well have it figured out, right? We understand the main underpinnings of reality, and that the rest of it is just mopping up and clearing up the details and so on. I always have to laugh, because that is so short-sighted. And usually, a book like that will come out, and then next month some discovery will be made that completely overturns our understanding of some process. Well, I guess maybe not. Maybe we don't know so much. And I think it's good to remember that we don't know so much. And then the other thing is, we think that, and we've been poisoned by this Judeo-Christian perspective, that's poisoned the collective mind, the idea that we're separated from nature and we own nature and we dominate nature. None of that is true. And lucky for us, it's not true, because look at what a mess we make of our own societies. My God, we're busy undermining the stability of nature, but imagine if we were actually in charge of it. So there is that aspect as well. You may know the author Michael Pollan, and the omnivore's dilemma. He describes this beautifully. We think we're domesticating plants, but it's funny how we seem to be carrying out the plants' agenda. So who is working for who here? But I don't really have a problem with that, because if you look at the biosphere as a whole, clearly plants are the essential thing that's keeping the whole shooting match going. It's keeping the whole thing going because it's through photosynthesis. It's bringing energy in from the cosmos and binding it into chemical energy, and then it runs this superorganism. What it amounts to, the biosphere is a superorganism, and it's being discussed in that way, the whole concept of Gaia and so on. People dismiss that and they say, oh, this is just new age hippie nonsense. Actually, it's not. The Gaia concept was not developed by a hippie. It was developed by James Lovelock, largely, who is a geophysicist and a fairly hard scientist. And for a while it was, fell out of favor, but I think people are beginning to, look at that in a different way and say, yeah, basically that is it, that life is maintaining conditions on Earth that are amenable to life. And if those processes weren't going on, some of these key factors, like the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere and so on, would quickly go off track. So life is keeping the Earth hospitable to life. So who's running things? Not us. In fact, we seem to be the piece of grit in the smooth running machinery of the living thing that is destabilizing a lot of these processes now. So no, not only are we not running things, I think we're sort of we're the species of concern to the community of life. And it's like, what are we going to do with these crazy primates, who can't seem to, restrain themselves?